Don't miss PETA's spectacular virtual event, our 40th anniversary and holiday party. Celebrate our bold work to save animals, sing along, dance along, dine along, and laugh along from home with over 1,000 fellow PETA revelers, revolutionaries, and surprise guests. It's Saturday, December 12th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific. You buy a ticket at PETA.org and get all the details there, and then you show up virtually. You won't want to miss this. It's the first ever live-streamed PETA party. Be part of it all as we celebrate global victories from our cutting-edge campaigns. There'll be celebrity award presentations, rollicking entertainment, humor, wonderful stories of animal rescues, a virtual gift and coupon suite, real gift boxes, and spectacular auction items to bid on. Plus, there'll be more sensational benefits for those choosing sponsorships. So join us, the PETA Spectacular Virtual Event, the 40th Anniversary and Holiday Party. It's Saturday, December 12th, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific. Buy your tickets at PETA.org. Get your details there, PETA.org, for the 40th Anniversary and Holiday Party. PETA has released new footage of the horrible conditions at the Washington National Primate Research Center at the University of Washington. You know it's bad when one of the center's veteran scientists confirms it all, and now she works at PETA. That's next on the PETA Podcast. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this behind-the-scenes look at PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. On today's episode, Monkey Crossing, it's where scientist Dr. Lisa Jones-Engel found herself when she realized the work she did at the Washington Primate Research Center was neither good ethics nor good science. She's becoming part of the trend of scientists who see the light and cross over to fight for the end of traditional animal research and advocate for the closure of the National Primate Center at the University of Washington, as well as the 6 other primate centers across the country. Here's my conversation with Dr. Lisa Jones-Engel, now PETA's Senior Science Advisor for Primate Research, on the PETA Podcast. You worked at this Washington National Primate Research Center at the University of Washington in Seattle. What was it like to work there? I mean, at some point, how long were you there?
I was at the Primate Center for 14 years as a scientist. I went directly from my PhD. I took a postdoc position at the Primate Center in the Department of Psychology, and I had every confidence when I went in that I was going to be able to help them better understand, to better characterize the primate biomedical model. And for 14 years, I hit my head against the wall.
Yeah, 14 years. And then I guess at one point it was just one year too many, huh?
That's what I was thinking about this today. So I spent a total of 17 years at the UW, because when I left the Primate Center, I went up to the faculty position in the anthropology department. But because I knew this question was going to come up, and I think it was actually the Fulbright. Mm-hmm. And so this is a plug for anyone who's looking at Fulbrights. But being able to step out, to have 5 or 6 months where I could just kind of sit back, albeit in a foreign country, doing this research, but not being within the Primate Center itself, not being within that facility, it gave me time to actually reflect and to realize, no, you don't belong here anymore. Your time here is done. It's time to move on.
So it took time away. It took a time to go out and see what did you see when you were, I presume you were observing primates? You were studying and observing primates? I was
back in Bangladesh. I'd spent a decade in Bangladesh as a research scientist. That was the work we were doing. We were looking at how diseases were moving between the monkeys and the folks in Bangladesh. I went back as a Fulbright scholar to focus on this very specific group of people called the Bede. These are the folks who, for millennia have used the dancing bears, the dancing monkeys, the snake charmers, because I had known from the research that they played a key role in helping us understand how monkeys and viruses are actually moving around that country. But I wanted to go back and I wanted to understand the people. I wanted to understand more about why these folks were not infected with some of the viruses we expected them to be, how they were getting their monkeys. But there was one day in particular, I was sitting with my translator, and we had just, these bede are, frankly, they're the lowest of the low when it comes to caste systems in South Asia. No one liked the bede. They had no access to homes. They were nomadic. They had no access to healthcare. They were reviled by basically everyone. And they had monkeys. And they had used these monkeys for centuries to basically to live. I mean, that's how they went about begging and using these dancing monkeys. But one day I was sitting there and I was interviewing one of the people who had one of these monkeys. And I asked her such a stupid question. I asked her, like, do you love your monkey? So her monkey at that time was kind of sitting with me, and I'm grooming that monkey and just kind of hanging out with this monkey, which is really what I love doing. So I said, hey, do you love your monkey? And I spoke enough Bangla at that point where she replied, we eat from our monkeys. And I thought, wait a minute, I know you don't eat monkeys. I know you don't eat these monkeys. Did you just say we eat these monkeys? And so I had my interpreter clarify for me. And she's like, no, we eat from these monkeys. Everything that we have comes from these monkeys. Our ability to have rice in our bowl, our ability to move from place to place, our ability to, when we're lucky, send our children to school, put clothes on their back, comes from those monkeys. And that for me was just, it was another one of those moments where I thought, you know, the relationship that we have with monkeys across all these different contexts are so profound. But here's a group who, frankly, their treatment of monkeys is, PETA has targeted the dancing monkeys in a number of countries. But these folks had nothing, and they loved their monkeys in a way that just, their monkeys were everything to them. And that was profound.
And so this was like an epiphany for you, because you were also making a living off the monkeys.
Exactly. You know what? And you cut right to the chase on that one. I had been making my living on these monkeys, whether or not it was, you know, well, no, it's actually full stop. I've been making my living on these monkeys. Yep. Ouch.
It got you, huh?
Yeah. Well, you got me on that one too, but yeah.
Well, I mean, but when it happened and you were talking through the interpreter and you're there in Bangladesh, it must have struck you that you've been working maybe in the wrong place for all these years, huh?
I had been using these monkeys. So when we started this research program 20 years ago, you know, we really talk about Team Monkey, promoting human primate commensalism. So really promoting the way that humans and monkeys can get along. And this idea that by understanding this, we improve primate conservation. That's how I sell it. That's how I sold it. But sitting there that day, it all just kind of dropped into place to me, which was, I had made my living off of monkeys. I wasn't a vivisector. I didn't cut monkeys open. But I did trap monkeys and I did sedate them. And then I collected measurements from them and I collected biological samples from them. I then woke them up. Now I'm also holding them on my lap, and I've got this tremendous team experience around me, and we're incredibly careful with these animals. And each time I would release them back into their home environment where I got them from. So I felt very good about that. But I was eating from these monkeys.
And so it must have struck you in this really odd way when you're talking to these people, and you're describing the caste system, and these people were unloved, lower than low, but you're with them. They're describing their love of the monkey, and here you are from the first world, from privilege. It must have really hit you hard, huh?
It hit me hard, and it just, her look at me. She's like, "What do you mean? What do we love these monkeys?" It was this realization that, and the monkeys were so critical to their survival. They literally could not live without these animals. Some of these folks really did care very deeply for these monkeys. They had intimate relationships with them. It's if you've never been groomed by a monkey, you're missing out. Let me tell you, there's this notion of, and this is actually why grooming is so important. It's when you have some other being that focuses so intently on you, it's magical. It's what we all really seek in our relationship with our partners. It's this absolute.
Well, wait a minute. Groomed by a monkey. That means the monkeys actually lays hands on and.
Yeah, that's what monkeys do. And monkeys, whether it's these performing monkeys, whether it's these monkeys that we see in the temples throughout South and Southeast Asia, the urban monkeys, if monkeys get a chance, monkeys use grooming. They use touch to establish bonds, to develop their position in the hierarchy, to make relationships. That's the exact same thing that you and I do. Humans we've kind of moved away from walking up to the next person or sitting down next to them and starting to kind of touch them and flip through their hair. Monkeys they're not looking for lice or dirt or whatnot. And they do those things and they find some of those things. But what they're doing is they are establishing a relationship with that other being that's powerful. That brings them safety. It brings them affection. It brings them access to resources. It's what makes a monkey, being able to groom and to have contact with another monkey.
So when you were with these monkeys and you got this revelation in this moment, what did you do when you got back home?
I knew at that point that my time doing this research was done. I still went back to, I'm a scientist at my core, and there were still questions that I believed needed to be answered at that primate center. Like, why are we so terrified of tuberculosis, and yet we have all these monkeys who are exposed to people out in the wild with TB and they're not dropping dead, but we're afraid of it here in the lab? Why are we afraid of these other viruses that these monkeys exposed humans to out in the wild, but it doesn't seem to be transferring here? I still wanted to answer these basic scientific questions that I knew that I was uniquely positioned to answer because I had spent so many years straddling these two worlds, one foot with monkeys in the wild, one foot in the primate biomedical facilities. But the Washington Primate Center didn't want to know the answer to those questions. And when I kept pushing, they said, "You can leave now." And so I did. And I went up to the faculty, the UW faculty, and I taught undergraduates for a couple of years. I loved it. And by it had to be fate. There was the hand of God was in on this one. Yeah. Because one day I got an email that said, "Hey, do you want to join the university's Animal Oversight Committee?" And this is the committee that's responsible for looking at every experiment that uses animals actually passes through this committee. For the 14 years I was there, every time I was renewing my annual protocols, it would go to this institutional animal care and use committee. I believed in the authority, in the validity, and the transparency of this committee. When I wrote my papers and submitted them, and I said in there, all of my protocols had been reviewed and approved by this ICOOC, the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee, I truly believed that I had cleared this ethical and the scientific bar because it had gone through this committee. And here it was, the chair of this committee had reached out and said, "Hey, do you want to sit on this committee?" And I said, "Yes."
This was your way to make an impact, right?
This was my way to make an impact. This was my way to put someone who I know monkeys. I know what monkeys need physically, emotionally. I understand the basic science that's involved with monkeys. I would be the type of member that actually the 1985 revision to the Animal Welfare Act to develop these IACUC, I was kind of what they were thinking about back then.
It sounds like there's some kind of disappointment when you're on the IACUC, because now you are behind the scenes and you can see what everyone else is doing. And what did you find? Were things to a level, an ethical level that was satisfactory to you?
No, not at all. What became apparent very quickly was that this IACUC, in particular, the University of Washington IACUC, was functioning as a rubber stamp. Any protocol that came through, no matter how scientifically questionable, how physically disastrous it was to the animal, was approved. And that, to me, the IACUCs were established to basically do these harm-benefit analysis. Come on. We're not stupid. Everyone knows that when you keep an animal in captivity in the lab, you are causing it harm. But the expectation had been for myself, and I think for many scientists, that that harm was being weighed against the benefits. And that was the job of the IACUC to do. And at the University of Washington, that IACUC was not doing that job. So no matter what, it went through.
That was your IACUC. And then what happened to must have gotten to the point where you had to leave. At what point did that happen?
Ironically, it wasn't a monkey study. It was a pig study. And it was a protocol that had actually been closed down or had not been active for 3 or 4 years. This was a surgical protocol. They wanted to train surgical residents and community surgeons using pigs. And when I read this protocol, I said, "But wait a minute, what have you been doing for the last 3 years?" They said, "Oh, well, but now we have money. So now give us live pigs. Let us do it with live pigs." And I was like, "No, show me the data. Show me the data that would say that over these last 3 years, your cohort of surgeons were less well-trained using your alternatives than the previous cohorts who used live pigs." And I was literally shouted down in my IACUC. And I knew at that point that I was done. There was nothing more that I could do. And that was after nearly 2 full years. So I resigned.
So you gave it a shot. You gave it a shot first as an actual researcher, then as a member of the IACUCs, and now maybe here you could do something about what you saw. And it sounds like you witnessed really a broken system, huh?
I not just witnessed it, I documented it as well. And I found that the system wasn't just broken within the IACUC itself, but it was broken at every level. The desire to allow the system to continue, to not something as simple as I requested, we need to have an ethicist sitting on this IACUC. Our human subject review boards, they have ethicists who sit and review each one of these protocols that involves human subjects. We need to have an ethicist sitting on the IACUC. That's what the 85 Amendment to the Animal Welfare Act was suggesting. You need to have these voices who can help us understand, who can make these incredibly difficult decisions, who can help weigh the harm to the animal versus the benefit. And you know what? Scientists and veterinarians, we're not trained to do that. Specialists, ethicists are trained to do that. They should be sitting on these types of committees.
And yet it seemed like there was no interest in ethics, and there was only interest in approving the research of the university, for the university's self-interest, for the scientists and researchers' self-interest?
I wouldn't say that there was an interest in improving the research at the university. The interest was to not derail this path that had been worn down and which everyone had followed until I showed up. I was a problem. I was the problem child.
When that realization came, you must have seen the whole thing as a kind of a fraud in some ways. If it was intended to make the system better by having an oversight committee, that must have been disappointing too.
I was destroyed. Because I, as someone who believes so strongly in the power of science, and who knows that if you don't have good welfare, if you're going to do science, and this is what my very first mentor told me, and this is working in a chimpanzee lab. If you're going to do science, if you're going to inflict this type of pain and harm on these animals, you have to maintain the highest standards of welfare. That is the only justification. And at the University of Washington, it was so transparently clear that the science suffered, the animals suffered horrifically, and the system was broken. And it was no longer using animals to do this research. No, it's wrong. It doesn't work.
And so what brought you to PETA, and what made you think that maybe PETA would be the right way to go about overseeing all of this, and maybe even trying to undo this mechanism that you were a part of all these years?
I started with primates 33 years ago. I started in the biomedical field 30 years ago. During that period, up until a year and a half ago, I never once went to the PETA website. The animal activist community was considered the enemy. They were considered silly nincompoops who just don't understand science. They don't understand. They're just out there just kind of doing their crazy thing. And I didn't actually go to PETA. PETA came to me. And in my first conversation on the phone with Ulka and with Kathy, it became clear within about 3 minutes that these folks know what they're talking about. These women were able to put together, to synthesize, to connect the threads so quickly, so thoroughly. I was like, wait, that somebody's been lying to me all these years. This is not what I expected of the activist community.
Well, if someone was lying to you, I gather what you're saying is that the standard idea of all these activists and people who are counter to the research culture, they're loonies. They don't know what they're talking about, and that was maybe a form of propaganda in some ways.
I absolutely agree. It's within the primate biomedical community, the word comes down. These are the animal activists. They know nothing. You don't look at their materials. You certainly don't engage with them. We were always notified when the activists were on campus or they were coming towards us. We were told, this is how you behave. You literally do not engage. So when I did engage, it was revelatory. The type of understanding, the type of science that goes on at PETA, PETA scientists understand the science, they understand the welfare, they put the two together, and they are an incredible force. And that is not something that I had anticipated at all. I had no idea what PETA was, what PETA was capable of. And, but it didn't take me very long to realize, oh, actually, you know what? This is where I was supposed to be.
What prevents traditional mainstream science from working together with those who want a more ethical science? Is there a way that they can work together?
I what an interesting question. Is there a way you would think? I mean, my training is as an anthropologist. So I'm actually trained to look at how connections are made between people. And there is such an impenetrable wall that exists between the biomedical community and the activist community. So when I started with PETA, I thought that my job was going to be to once again, I was now it would be like I have three legs. I'd have a leg in wild primates, a leg in science, and now I'd have a leg in animal activism. And that leg was kicked out for me about 36 hours after I joined PETA, because I was scheduled to actually give a keynote address in DC a day and a half after I signed the PETA paperwork. This address had been scheduled many, many months in advance. It was a talk that I had given internationally. And it was basically me kind of going there and talking to these other scientists and these technicians and these husbandry folks. This was all part of ALAP. And I was just going to tell them about our very complex history that we've had with macaques. I flew into DC. I actually got to the airport, and when I let the folks know that, all right, I just want to be, and I want to be very transparent with you. I have a new job. I had already told them several months prior to that, I had left my university position. I told them why. And I said, I've got a new job. I'm now PETA's senior science advisor for primate experimentation. And there was dead silence for a moment. And I said, you know what? I am who I am. I'm Lisa Jones-Engel. I'm the same scientist that I've been forever. Here, look at the presentations, review them. There's nothing political about this. They reviewed them. I went to bed. The next morning, I got a text at 7 a.m. Hey, can you come down, see us in the lobby of the hotel? I was then escorted off the premises. The mere fact that I now wore the PETA mantle was enough to completely, it terrified these folks. It separated me then from the scientific community that I had been a part of for 30 years.
So you were a persona non grata, and the only thing that's keeping that kind of mindset is what? Self-preservation on the part of the scientists? What is it? It's almost an anti-science kind of approach.
I think about this a lot. I do. I think about how can I, someone who I deeply love macaques, Emil, in a way that's just, I've worked with chimps, I've worked with orangutans, but macaques are just, they're my monkey, right? And yet, for years and years, I would trap them, I would sedate them, I would do these things, I'd wake them up and I'd let them go. And I would do that confident in the knowledge that, I was collecting these very important data, that I was helping kind of identify the next hot spot for the emerging disease. I was helping primate conservation. And even though I saw time and again examples of where I actually caused pain and suffering to these macaques, it didn't register in my brain. And I find that extraordinary, that I couldn't see that. And I think that for scientists if you have to look into the eyes of those animals and to see what you're doing, you're done for. You're true. It is the extraordinary person who could continue on.
So you have to keep yourself from looking them in the eye and seeing them for what they are for as long as you can, I guess, if you want to sustain your scientific practice, right?
Exactly. One of my very first experiences at the Washington Primate Center was I needed to practice actually placing a tuberculin skin test in the eyelid of a monkey. So I contacted the husbandry staff, the vet staff, and said, I need to practice this. And they said, okay, come on downstairs. We've got a monkey who's actually going to tissue redemption, tissue something. I was like, okay. I went downstairs, and on the table was this obviously very deeply sedated macaque. It was a female Nemestrina. She was beautiful. She was on her back. Her arms and legs were tied out. She wasn't intubated. Tissue distribution, that's what she was scheduled for. And as I'm standing there looking at her, and I'm standing at the foot of the table, and I'm touching her foot because, again, I know this monkey couldn't feel me. And I knew at that point that she was going to be dead in a few minutes. But I wanted her to know that I was there. At that, right then, someone walked in, an investigator. I don't think it was actually the principal investigator. I think it was probably a postdoc. He went up to the front of this monkey, and within less than 30 seconds, he plucked out her eye, dropped it into the dish, and then left. And at no point in the time did that man touch that monkey. At no point did he acknowledge that was a being right there who had just given herself. In his case, he took the eye. He didn't see her. And I think that for most scientists, they don't dare see. Because if they do, you can't continue to do what you do. And this is what PETA does. We make you see.
Well, in defense of your colleague there, or former colleague, does it make for a better science if you don't see it? Can they argue objectivity? Can they argue that, well, I have to keep arm's length so that I can get at the truth? Does that stand up to
that's a well trodden path that's repeated again and again. But the what we know and what is so very clear is that everything that happens to these monkeys when they are in the primate facility impacts and distorts their utility, their use, when they are used as primate biomedical models. Everything from whether or not their mom was raised in a corral with other monkeys, to the size of their cage, to the type of monkey chow that they get to eat, to the number of friends that they've had, to whether or not they've ever been able to spend time grooming another monkey. All of that impacts and distorts the results of their physiology. And scientists don't know that. Not only do they not know that, they don't know enough to ask that. That, I think, is the problem.
You now are firmly ensconced in PETA, and you are the senior science advisor. And now PETA has just released this video from inside your former workplace, the Washington National Primate Research Center at the University of Washington in Seattle. And it shows how these monkeys live. And, of course, this is the way they were living when you were there, I imagine. From your perspective now, how does it strike you how they're living?
This is the same way they've been living for the last 60 years. That's, the University of Washington will say, hey, we just built this fancy new multi-million-dollar animal research care facility, the ARC. It's underground. The cages are the same. Maybe they're called Seattle-style cages now or whatever style cages, but they're the same cage. They're the same dorm room, fridge-sized cage that these monkeys have for decades and decades existed in. Nothing has changed. I don't know how to explain to you adequately or to the listener adequately how exquisitely social and intelligent macaques are, except to give an example. And actually, this was a thing that this This was the turning point in my research career. The bede finished it off, but this monkey, also in Bangladesh, she started the very rapid slide. We were in a village doing the same type of research we've been doing for the last decade. Our trap was it's like about a meter by a meter. No, 2 meters by 2 meters in size. It's very open. It's got this net that covers it. You can certainly see what's going on and out. You can imagine that when we go into these villages to work, we often draw a big crowd, which was the case. So anyway, it had been a very good day. A lot of monkeys had come into the trap. We had closed the door. We'd safely anesthetized them all. We'd gotten an infant this time. And I generally was very careful not to get mom and infants, because infants get upset. They squeak a lot. They make problems. This infant was a problem child. We're working on mom. This infant's climbing all around. I've got people holding on to him. Anyway, we finish up. We put all the monkeys back in the big cage. The infant is back in there with mom. A couple of hours pass. The sun is setting. All the monkeys are woken up. I'm looking out. There's just pure grass in front of me. I'm like, this is going to be a great release. I got 50, 100 people standing behind me. I tilt the cage back. All the monkeys take off. I'm thinking, oh, I wish I had taken a picture. And then I hear squeak. And I look down, and that infant was still holding on to the mesh. And in a nanosecond, I'm like, oh,
yeah,
whoops.
Yeah.
And I look out, and mom is already 50, 75, 100 meters. I mean, she took off quickly. She heard that infant too. And she stopped, and she literally did one of these things, like checking her body, like, wait a minute, and she turned around. And again, she is facing 50, 75, 100 humans are right there. She did not hesitate for an instant. She came back. I'm still holding the trap back up. She comes in, she grabs that infant, sticks it on her, and spins around and goes back. And yeah, that's it. I was done. That she was going to do whatever she had to do to get that infant back, no matter what it cost her. And I was like, no, I can't do this anymore. And it made me realize that it happened again and again. I just hadn't seen it. It hadn't wedged into my brain that these monkeys will do anything that they need to do in order to protect each other.
And so now that you see this video that PETA has released showing the conditions, and now that you have a totally new set of lenses looking at this, what should the public be concerned about? What's happening at the Washington Primate Center?
Primates are social creatures. In order to exist, in order to be, a primate has to be with other primates. So at the Washington Primate Center, at basically all of the primate centers, when these animals are kept in these conditions, these small cages, you are destroying everything that makes them a primate. You're destroying their physiology. You're destroying their mental well-being. You're destroying their physical well-being.
What does it do to the science if you put the monkeys in this situation where they're not even at the height of their monkeyness and they're something else? They're prisoners, really. What does it do to the science?
Scientists cannot have it both ways. And actually, this is what the scientists want. They want to argue that macaques are a terrific biomedical model because they are so like us. Evolutionarily, we're similar. There's that whole 25 million year gap, but let's let that go for a side. Behaviorally, they're similar. Immunologically, they're similar. But you know what? They're forgetting about those brains. You're right. Monkeys are just like us. And if you take us or you take a monkey and you stick us or the monkey in a small cage and you take away any type of physical comfort, any type of their ability to control their environment, any type of mental challenge, and you take away companionship, you destroy that being. You destroy the human, you destroy the monkey, And you completely distort the science. We know what stress does to our bodies. We know now that our gut microbiome has profound impact on how we metabolize drugs. We know all of these things. And yet the scientists want us to think, well, you know what? You don't have to worry about that the monkeys is upset or that this is mentally truly torturous for these animals. Because we got their bodies, they're just monkeys. What's the big deal? You know what? They are monkeys. That's the big deal. They are us. Macaques, only humans are more widely distributed primates around the world. And you know why macaques can do it? Because they are so like us. There's a reason why we call it torture. There's a reason that we use terms like isolation. There are a reason why, when I would hear these words coming out of the animal activist community, or even kind of early on with PETA, I really pushed back against those terms. I'm like, no, it's what we do isn't torture. It's not that they're in isolation. They're singly caged, they're singly housed. But strip all that away, and what you see on those videos that is their life. That's their life from when they're born. The few that make it to old age, most actually don't, but they are spending decades in those cages, metal cage. They've got a little perch, and they got a plastic Kong ball. And once a day, they might get a flavored ice cube, or maybe they get some greens, or someone will flip on the TV. We all know from our experience with this pandemic that's not life. We can't survive that.
You also mentioned that the macaques are very similar to humans, and yet as a basis for experimentation or as models, they aren't really good substitutes for humans in order to get at the kind of scientific breakthroughs that people are seeking in these primate centers, right?
Absolutely not. It's early on, someone was, they were doing a study. So macaques are quadrupeds. They're arboreal. Actually, they're arboreal and terrestrial quadrupeds. They can move between the trees and the ground very, very easily. But they're quadrupeds. Yes, sometimes they sit upright. And yes, occasionally they will hang from an arm. But for most time, they walk on all fours. When they mate, they mate on all fours. And so someone was developing they were trying to develop an HIV treatment that would be used in human females. And I remember looking at this, it was long before I sat on the iCook. And I was thinking, so you're taking this kind of, it wasn't a spermicide, but they were taking this gel. They had the monkeys in the tabletop restraint device. They would stick in this gel, and then they would, wait, and they would challenge them with, challenge them with the virus. And again, this is all in the quadrupedal position. And my first thought was, I'm sorry, this is not how human females, this is not how we locomote. This is not how we mate. And it was one of those things like, folks, monkeys are not furry little humans with tails. They're not. The things that matter are the same, like how our brains respond to these types of deprivation and stress. But also, many of the things that matter are simply not the same. And the scientists, you can't have it both ways on this.
You talk about that, and then there are other things about the facilities, like monkeys. Scientists make errors, and monkeys die. There's disease. There's problems with oversight, and there are issues in these primate centers that aren't really adequately addressed. Talk about some of them.
So there are 7 remaining primate centers. A few years ago, Harvard saw what was coming. They were they saw the failings in their primate center. They saw the welfare violations mounting up. They saw how expensive it was to keep monkeys. They saw how difficult it was to keep monkeys, and they closed their primate center down. And they've focused now on more human relevant research. The University of Washington Primate Center, of the remaining 7, is the poster child for everything that is wrong in a primate center. You have monkeys that strangled to death on enrichment devices. You have monkeys that repeatedly die of dehydration because the infrastructure is broken. The UW Primate Center can't even do the most basic thing, which is to maintain the health and keep those monkeys infection-free. They can't do that. And frankly, that is the raison d'etre of primate centers to begin with. They were established because scientists said, hey, we need a steady supply of clean monkeys. Well, that hasn't really worked out. That's another very long conversation. But the UW Primate Center can't they can't keep MRSA out of their colony. They can't keep valley fever out of their colony. They've had breaks with tuberculosis in their colony. They've had breaks with simian retroviruses in their colony. And if you're a monkey, from a scientist's perspective, a monkey is only good as a model as it is well characterized. The Primate Center can't do that. They can't even keep their own staff free of COVID-19 infections. And if you can't keep your staff healthy, you're not going to be able to keep your monkeys healthy. And we don't know whether or not the Primate Center monkeys have been infected with COVID-19, but we know the staff members have been, and that those staff worked intimately with the monkeys. If they can't keep their staff healthy, there's no reason to expect that the integrity of the monkeys as research subjects have been maintained. Just from an infectious disease standpoint, to say nothing of the conditions that those monkeys are held at the Washington Primate Center they're medieval.
So tell me, if we got rid of the primate centers, I mean, there are 7 left. Harvard shut down a couple of years back. If everyone followed the example of Harvard, they shut down the primate centers, would there be any loss in scientific progress or any kind of knowledge that would benefit mankind? Would we be at a loss at all if any of these primate centers, or if all the primate centers were shut down?
We wouldn't be at a loss at all. In fact, these primate centers were on their way to being shut down by NIH when the HIV/AIDS pandemic hit 35 years ago. It was kind of like a boon for the primate centers at that point, because up to then, they had not been fulfilling their promise. The pandemic hit, the scientists said, oh, we need something that looks like a human. Here, we got these monkeys. Let us use these monkeys. And I ask you, 35 years on, do we have an HIV/AIDS vaccine? No. Do we have a malaria vaccine? No. Do we have a tuberculosis vaccine? No. Do we have a Zika, a SARS, a MERS vaccine? No. We have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dead monkeys, billions of dollars wasted. These monkeys, these primate facilities are not the pathway to improved human health. And this COVID pandemic has shown it so clearly that the era of monkey research is done. It's over. We have vaccines in phase 3 clinical trials without lengthy monkey studies. And the only reason we use the monkey studies at all is it's a habit. The scientists who are doing this work now have realized that no, there are better ways to do this science. There are quicker ways to do these science. And frankly, the monkey stuff only misleads us and sends us down the wrong path, the same way that the monkey studies have misled us and sent us down the wrong path for the last 60 years.
Now, you mentioned AIDS and how the monkeys were on their way out. All right, that's 35 years, a generation in a few more years. Is this a generational thing where scientists who are just trying to hang on to their old methodologies? And if it is, what happens to the new scientists? I mean, where are they to come in and say there are better models. There's a better way.
I think this is a generational issue, and we're seeing it. So the folks who are the scientists who are in the primate centers now, kind of the core scientists, they're all aging out. They're all retiring. They've ridden that monkey throughout their career, and they're kind of dusting their hands off and heading out. And we aren't seeing young scientists really who are coming in to pick this up, because part of it is I think that there is this increased understanding of the ethical costs, the consequences, ethically, morally, of using primates in this type of truly horrific research. But even more importantly, the science has not borne out. And so these young scientists are coming up and they're using these human relevant alternatives. And that's a beautiful thing to see. They are not caught up in they don't have to sustain these primate centers. These primate centers are an enormous resource suck. NIH built them, they've established them. Each year they've got to spend, $100 million plus just to keep the lights on, to keep the monkeys fed. And it's hard to stop this basically this juggernaut that has just been going forward. But I think it's very telling that you don't see young scientists choosing to use monkeys in research.
It's also almost like you're describing this, what I've always called a boondoggle, this idea that scientists need a welfare system to keep younger scientists, younger researchers employed, and there's a hierarchy, and you go up the channel and you get more grants and you get more money. And then, of course, the university gets more money. And so it does. I mean, there's a scientific way to look at this and say, oh, no good. But then there's this boondoggle cash, federal grants, this way to look at it. And once again, you come out and say, this is a bad model too.
It is a bad model. And it's a bad model because the science hasn't played out and because it is extraordinarily expensive. We stopped using chimpanzees about 5 years ago. Prior to that, we had, the chimps were really big in research at the start of the HIV/AIDS epidemic. But keeping chimps in captivity is astonishingly expensive. They're dangerous. They're big. And so as we started moving away from chimps, we went to macaques. Why? Macaques are a tenth of the size. They could stick a lot more in a much smaller place. It is not surprising, and it's not intentional, that now what we're seeing in the primate community is, well, let's move away. So we left the chimps. The macaques aren't quite, doing what we thought they were going to do. Let's go to marmosets. Now,
marmosets.
A marmoset, a tiny New World monkey that the only salient factor is that they're little. They take up less space. They breed more rapidly than macaques. Chimps, you could get a chimp infant, once every year and a half or so. You could get a rhesus macaque infant every year, or maybe a couple per year. Marmosets, they twin. They also reproduce much more quickly. More monkeys, more money, more messed up science.
So, Lisa, you worked at the Washington National Primate Research Center, and now you're PETA's senior advisor, scientific advisor. PETA's released this video. What do you want people to take away from the videos, and what should they do to try to stop the National Primate Research Centers like the one at UW?
The University of Washington abuses and it kills monkeys. And we know that because, once again, the Primate Center, as well as the university's Animal Experimentation Committee, are under investigation. by the USDA for these repeated violations of the Animal Welfare Act. This isn't the first time. This is UW, and the Primate Center has a very long list of violations of the Animal Welfare Act. The era, the age of the primate as a research subject is done. This Washington National Primate Center is millions of dollars in debt. It's going from leadership crisis to leadership crisis. It's hemorrhaging staff. They can't keep their monkeys healthy. They can't keep enough people present to take care of the animals. The scientists themselves are fleeing the center. It's time. And PETA we have been writing to the University of Washington, to the leadership, for a year now. Actually, I started writing to the leadership long before I was PETA, saying, look, the information is there. The path forward is very clear. The path forward is to shut this primate center down, focus your resources on 21st century science. And this is what PETA is saying. You know, we've got our web pages up, we've got our videos that are coming out, and we're asking the public to go to PETA.org and to look at this information, to let the university leadership know that they've seen the information, they've seen the video, they've seen the documentation, they know that this primate center needs to close down. And now the university needs to make the decision. And the university is at an inflection point. January 26th is when the Primate Center would submit their next 5-year renewal grant to the university or to the National Institutes of Health. The university can make the decision now to not submit that grant. And if they do that, that will allow for a very orderly, transparent, and effective way for this Primate Center to shut down, close down the science, to make arrangements for these monkeys to retire, to go into sanctuary, and for this chapter, this very embarrassing chapter for the University of Washington to be closed.
Dr. Lisa Jones-Engel, now PETA's Senior Science Advisor for Primate Research. She used to work at the Washington Primate Research Center and advocates for its closing. For more information, go to PETA.org. And that's our show this time out. You can contact us at PETA.org. You can find me on Twitter at Emil Amok, that's EMILAMOK, or on AMOK.com, or see my work at ALDEF, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, that's AALDEF.org/blog. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts, where you can always rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. Our music is provided by Carbonworks. Check them out on YouTube. And don't forget our Holiday Spectacular, PETA's spectacular virtual event. It's our 40th anniversary and holiday party. Celebrate the bold work to save animals. You can sing along with about 1,000 fellow revelers. It's Saturday, December 12th, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Go to PETA.org for details, buy a ticket, and join in the fun. That's December 12th, Saturday, PETA's spectacular virtual event. And thank you again for joining us. Join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.